It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell.
We now know from the president the purpose of the meeting was to get dirt on Hillary Clinton.
I had bad information at that time. I made a mistake in my statement. That happens when you have cases like this.
He looks absolutely uncredible, as does the president.
She helped falsify numbers so that Manafort could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes.
When you have a person on the stand who has an immunity deal, obviously you attack them.
The real question is, what are we going to hear from Rick Gates?
This is New Day with Alisyn Camerota and John Berman.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It's Monday, August 6th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Nice to be back beside you.
Great to have you back. I hope you had a wonderful week off.
I slept past 3 a.m.
What?
Always a good thing. And what did I miss? Oh, this. President Trump admits flat out that his son met with a Russian lawyer to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Dirt that Trump Jr. was told, flat out, was part of the Russian government effort to help his father. Now, the law says it's a crime to accept anything of value from a foreign person for the purpose of influencing an election. Yet, the president says this was totally legal. Now, sources tell CNN the president is concerned about Don Jr.'s legal exposure for his involvement in this meeting.
President Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, says he made a mistake last year when he said President Trump was not involved in crafting that misleading statement on the Trump Tower meeting. Sekulow blames the false statements on, quote, bad information. We have it all covered for you. Let's go first to CNN's Abby Phillips. She is live in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. What's the latest there, Abby?
Well, good morning, Alisyn. President Trump growing increasingly agitated about the Mueller probe and lashing out over the weekend, both at campaign rallies and on Twitter. This weekend, he tweeted in the clearest terms that we've seen him use yet that the meeting at Trump Tower was about getting dirt on his political opponent. He said this was a meeting to get information on an opponent totally legal and done all the time in politics, and it went nowhere. I did not know anything about it. But it is not legal to accept political help from foreign entities in a campaign. And we've also reported this weekend that a source close to the White House is saying that President Trump is growing increasingly worried that Mueller is encroaching on his family, particularly Donald Trump Jr., his son, who was at the center of that infamous Trump Tower meeting in 2016. Now, a source close to Don Jr. says he's not worried about this meeting at all, and that he says he did nothing wrong. But we also know that this could come down to the president and his son's word against his personal attorneys, Michael Cohen, who has said that he is willing to testify to Bob Mueller that the president knew in advance about this Trump Tower meeting. Now, meanwhile, all of this is happening while the president is here in Bedminster, New Jersey. He's at his golf course for a working vacation for about 11 days. We are looking to see if the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, will make his way here to New Jersey. They're just still deliberating about this issue of the interview with Robert Mueller and whether or not they do that. As they deliberate with that, we're expecting perhaps to see a response from the Mueller team to the Trump attorneys this week at some point. John.
All right, Abby Phillip for us in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. Abby, thanks so much. We just want to take a minute here to walk down the long and winding path that is the series of convoluted and contradictory explanations about the Trump Tower meeting. Preface it with this. Way back in March of 2017, Donald Trump Jr. told the New York Times, quote, "Did I meet with people that were Russian? I'm sure I did, but none that were set up, none that I can think of at the moment, and certainly none that I was representing the campaign in any way, shape, or form." Turns out that is not true. Way not true. On July 8th, 2017, the New York Times broke the story about his June 9th, 2016 meeting with a Kremlin-linked lawyer. Trump Jr. issued something of a smokescreen statement to the New York Times at that moment saying, quote, "We primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children, but it was not a campaign issue at the time, and there was no follow-up." The next day, the New York Times published another story alleging Trump Jr. took the meeting because he was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. 2 days later, to get ahead of yet another story from the Times, Trump Jr. released the emails with music publicist Rob Goldstone, who set up the meeting. Trump Jr. was explicitly told the meeting was to, quote, "provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary as part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump." To which Trump Jr. responded, "If it's what you say, I love it. So much for no meeting set up with Russians and not representing the campaign in any way, shape, or form." The same day, Trump Jr. appeared on Fox News.
Did you tell your father anything about this?
It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell.
For the next few weeks, the president and his team continued to repeatedly deny the president knew anything about the meeting.
Did you know at the time that they had the meeting? No, I didn't know anything about the meeting.
He was not aware of the meeting, did not attend the meeting, and was only informed about the emails very recently by his counsel.
So of particular interest is the initial statement that Donald Trump Jr. gave to the New York Times claiming the meeting was about Russian adoptions. The Washington Post first reported the statement was actually dictated by the president on Air Force One, but the president's lawyer and press secretary, of course, denied that.
He certainly didn't dictate, but, like I said, he weighed in, offered suggestion like any father would do.
But now we know that wasn't true. He did dictate. On June 2nd this year, the New York Times published a letter from President Trump's lawyer to special counsel Robert Mueller that was sent on January 29th. In it, the president's attorney wrote, "The president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son." So the meeting was set up, the meeting that was allegedly set up to talk about adoptions, that wasn't true. The president not dictating it, that's not true. So how about the president's claim that he did not know about the meeting beforehand? Now, his longtime lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, claims the president was told and signed off on the meeting beforehand, and sources tell CNN Cohen is prepared to tell that to the special counsel. Finally, that brings us to this weekend, with the president flat out saying the meeting was to get dirt from the Russians on Hillary Clinton. This was a meeting to get information on an opponent. Totally legal and done all the time in politics, and it went nowhere. I did not know about it. That is what the president just said. That is way different than the explanation he dictated and then his people told lies about, suggesting that the meeting was about adoptions. And that is where we are this morning. So let's bring in CNN senior political analyst John Avlon, CNN political analyst Alex Burns, and CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero. I think, to me, there are two big important things here. First of all, the law, which says
that's a big one.
It's illegal to take anything of value from someone foreign.
Yeah, I feel that's an open and shut case.
Let's put that up, just so people can see the actual law here. This is U.S. Code 30121, contributions and donations by foreign nationals. Federal law makes it a crime for any person to solicit, accept, or receive a contribution of anything of value from a foreign person or U.S. political campaign for the purpose of influencing any election for federal office.
I mean, what more really is there to talk about after that one?
Carrie, you're the lawyer here.
Well, the law on its face, if we just read the words of it, it looks like it does apply to anything of value. The question as a legal matter is what is something of value? And that's where we get into the details of, has there been a case quite like this? Legal scholars really disagree as to whether there's something that applies directly, a prior case that applies directly. The answer to that is probably no. And so does existing precedent, would it be able to interpret this particular meeting of obtaining derogatory information about a domestic political opponent from a foreign power, foreign government, and would that violate the campaign finance laws? An argument can be made that it does, but in this case, I think it's really important to separate the legal questions from the political questions about the consequences of the president and his inner circle repeatedly telling different stories about what the meeting was about and whether there's any political consequences to that.
But just to sort of ground this in history, I mean, this is something the Founding Fathers explicitly warned about. Washington warning against foreign governments influencing and interfering in our elections. In 1968, Nixon's campaign, now we know that a third party was negotiating with the North Vietnamese on their behalf, something that Nixon was afraid might lead to his impeachment. Of course, it was something else almost 44 years to the day that did that. Watergate. So this is, there is the legal something of value campaign finance question, but this is not subtle, folks. This is foreign governments, foreign folks interfering in trying to influence our elections.
Alex, I don't want to parse this anymore. The law says you can't do this. Okay, it's very clear. The law explicitly says you cannot do this. Now, is their argument that, well, we didn't collect anything of value? Had they actually delivered on the dirt, then it would have been illegal, but we never really got anything of value. Is that the loophole that they're looking at?
Well, I don't know what their argument would actually be in the event that Don Jr. faced these charges, right? And we don't know that that's going to happen. What we do know right now is that this also comes as the president is under scrutiny for obstruction of justice. We know that this is part of a long pattern, as John just laid out, of false and misleading and clearly deliberately misleading statements about what happened in that Trump Tower meeting. That's a very serious thing, both legally and politically.
Well, hold on a second. But as we pointed out, you can lie to the media as much as you want. That's not illegal.
Well, we don't know. We actually don't know that it's going to be considered totally within bounds for there to be a pattern of essentially a very public cover-up, right? That if there is an allegation of obstruction and conspiracy to obstruct, right, that actually is the kind of thing that could be in bounds. But look, my expertise is in politics, not in the law, and sort of the point that I want to underscore here is that, you know, it's important not to get so focused on the Mueller side of this that we lose sight of the sort of scandal that is staring at us in plain sight, right? That the president just acknowledged very publicly that his son, his official spokespeople, and he himself have been misleading the American people about what happened in that Trump Tower meeting. That's a staggering admission.
That just happened. The president just did that. He just admitted that the statement he dictated on Air Force One, that his lawyers admit now that he dictated, is wildly misleading. That statement put side by side with this statement he just put out on Twitter for us all to see, they directly contradict each other. You do not often have a president of the United States who admits, as he just did, that he willingly misled or, yes, lied to the American people.
And this is where setting the bar at unlawful or illegal behavior really does miss the point, right? That when the president comes out and says and does a 180 on something that is clearly a very, very important matter that he's trying to conceal from the public, that on its own is a giant, giant deal.
And carelessly on a random Sunday morning tweet does it, an admission of lying, and something that at least starts to fit the dictionary, if not legal definition, of collusion, right? You know, a secret or illegal cooperation, coordination, or conspiracy. So this is a big deal, and sometimes there's a frog in a pot of boiling water strategy of, you know, telling the truth slowly. This is a lot bigger than that. There is nothing about this that is in the neighborhood of normal when it comes to the presidency.
Carrie, I'm still stuck on the law. Can you just help me understand, since it is so explicit in the law that you're not allowed to take any contribution of any value from a foreign, I'll just read it. Federal law makes it a crime for any person to solicit, accept, or receive a contribution of anything of value from a foreign person for a U.S. political campaign for the purpose of influencing any election for federal office. The law is very explicit. You can't do this. Is it that they're going to argue that they didn't get anything of value they had intended to, but that's not what was delivered by the Russians?
Well, that's one other argument. Let me try to put it in context. The special counsel's theory of the overall case is conspiracy to defraud the United States by trying to influence the election. That's what the Russian intelligence operation was about. If somebody domestically, if someone in the Trump campaign was going to actually be charged with something, they could be charged with conspiracy, but there would likely be some underlying claim. So usually someone isn't just charged with conspiracy, there's some underlying claim. If it's campaign finance, traditionally the campaign finance laws have been used regarding money. I mean, that's really what they were about, getting money in a campaign, and that's how they have been used. There could be a theory of the case that the thing of value that was given, it also could be a loan, something like that. The theory could be that they received this information, but they didn't receive anything, we're told so far, whether or not that turns out to be true. And so there's different ways this could go. Number one, the special counsel's office, if they thought that they could reasonably succeed in a criminal case, which is the standard for prosecution, they could make an argument that the Trump team thought that they were getting derogatory information, and that's a thing of value.
Which they did.
But what I'm suggesting is that under this specific statutory argument, that's a theory. That's not necessarily something that is well established by law. I'm not saying that it's okay, but, and there is a separate, as John referred to, there's a separate constitutional theory of emoluments where a president is not supposed to receive or benefit from a foreign government. So these are the different legal theories. But the political point, let me just finish. The political point is so important because whether or not it turns out that there is a plausible legal prosecution for a member of the Trump campaign to obtain information or try to obtain information from a foreign government that is simply information, the bigger political point is, what does Congress and the American people think about the fact that the president has now confirmed that the campaign thought that they were receiving the assistance of a foreign government? And that is a political question, not a legal one.
But hey, that is not subtle. We know that from an email that Goldstone sent that they were understood that Trump was supporting, that the Russians were supporting Trump's campaign. Two, the things that campaigns spend money on today are lists. They are information. They are opposition research, which is what was specifically being offered, including early information that the DNC was hacked and they're incriminating emails out. And then subsequently, there's also correspondence with WikiLeaks that demonstrates control of that information. And so that's a whole nother tributary of this that's going to be real problematic down the line. But that is what campaigns spend money on to a great extent: opposition research and actionable information.
Got it. So it's valuable. I understand what you're saying. Thank you all for all of that context and expertise. Okay. Meanwhile, there's actually a trial happening that we need to update you on, and that's Paul Manafort. It will resume with the prosecution's star witness possibly taking the stand today. We'll give you an update.
New Day is brought to you by Cool Sculpting. Find out more on coolsculpting.com.
This afternoon, Paul Manafort's trial on bank fraud and tax charges gets back underway. The defense set to cross-examine a key prosecution witness. This is the former Trump campaign chair's longtime bookkeeper. Now, Manafort's former aide, Rick Gates, could also take the stand as a star witness. That will be a big deal. CNN's Joe Johns live outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia with the latest. Joe.
Good morning, John. Okay, this accountant that you talked about there, who is back on the stand today, her name is Cindy Laporta, and what she did at the end of the proceedings last week is she essentially laid out more or less the emotional, if you will, and dramatic high point so far of this trial when she testified that she put an enormous bogus loan on the books to help show Paul Manafort's income, taxable income, reducing, if you will. She did that, she said, among other things, because he was a client of the firm and they wanted to keep the big client of the firm. Now, that could have gotten her into enormous legal trouble, except for one thing. She has immunity from prosecution in order to testify in this case. So Cindy Laporta back on the stand, and she could be subjected to a very harsh cross-examination because of the immunity deal. She's in a position where the government and the prosecutors and the defense are fighting over whether there was some kind of a deal behind the scenes, essentially, to keep her out of jail. What went into that, what was going on behind the scenes, especially when you're dealing with the special counsel in the Russia investigation. Another witness who is very likely, I should say, to get some type of a tough cross-examination would be Rick Gates. That's the longtime deputy of Paul Manafort. He could be on the stand as early as today. He's already struck a deal of his own. In fact, he pleaded guilty to related charges and now is cooperating with the government. John Alisyn, back to you.
Joe, that is fascinating. Thank you for explaining how many people it takes to make a crime, alleged crime like this happen. Okay, let's discuss with John Avlon, Alex Burns, and Carrie Cordero. Carrie, what should everybody be watching for in the Manafort trial? What are you waiting to see?
I think the interesting piece will be whether or not the defense is able, going forward, whether or not the defense is able to knock down the credibility of the existing government witnesses. The interesting thing about this case is that these witnesses, nobody is really clean in this case. So even the people who are testifying in favor of the government's case and support the government's case, they have immunity. They have done things themselves that are potentially illegal. They cooperated in some way in the scheme to that was involved with evading taxes and other fraudulent activities. The witness on Friday is just a good example of that. So the question will be, can the defense be successful in trying to make it appear like Manafort in some way was a victim of other people's bad behavior and that he perhaps didn't know everything that was going on?
So Alex Burns, if Rick Gates does take the stand, the public is about to get a sense of not just campaign chair Paul Manafort's, but his deputy Rick Gates, two people who played a central role, albeit for a specific time, but a central role in the president's campaign. It's a tough look, and you can see the president getting uncomfortable with it by the way he's talking about it.
It is a tough look. He is very obviously uncomfortable, and he's handling it in a way that just makes veterans of embattled White House administrations just shake their heads. That the president has argued all along that this is not really a case about him, right? This is about Paul Manafort's finances. These are not crimes directly related to the Trump campaign, and so it's sort of an incidental association. And if he left it at that, that might be politically inoculating for him, right? That, look, Paul made some mistakes before he worked for me. Instead, the president has gone out and sort of insistently carried the attack on Manafort's behalf that federal prosecutors are being unfair to him, comparing Manafort in this sort of convoluted way to Al Capone. I think the suggestion being that bringing somebody up on tax charges is unfair.
Who's
if
the
you're
hero
really
here, by the way?
I don't know what the argument there is, right? But the basic underlying point is this is not a place where the president has to involve himself more deeply. This isn't his son under scrutiny for meeting with the Russians and potentially colluding during a presidential campaign. This is about his former campaign chairman having engaged in some alleged financial crimes, and yet the president keeps on leaping to his defense.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the president, chairman of the president's campaign, there are problems beyond just the apparent tsunami of sleaze that surrounded his consulting businesses. This is a guy, if you live in the suburbs of Washington or the Hamptons and have bank accounts in Cyprus where Russian money laundering is done, that's called a tell. The problem is this is just a lot of Russian money that seems to be flowing through these false accounts. And the playing the victim card seems to be very much in vogue, but it doesn't really ring true here.
Carrie, I know that the question of pardons always comes up. So regardless of what happens with Paul Manafort, can the president pardon him? And that also brings us to Don Jr., who there's sources tell us that the president has become increasingly concerned about his own son and whether or not he is in any legal jeopardy. So what do you want us to know about the pardon issue?
You know, Alisyn, this is a really serious issue that members of Congress really need to be thinking about ahead of time. The president has demonstrated over the last year that he is willing and able to exercise his constitutional pardon authority, which is an area that he has latched onto where the president has very strong and unreviewable executive powers. Right. The question, and this is a political question really for members of Congress, is how far are they willing to watch him use that power before it's considered an abuse? And so his comments recently about Manafort are along the lines of the same types of comments that he made for other individuals that he's pardoned. If he were to pardon Manafort, if a member of his family were somehow implicated, whether it's for a dramatic charge like conspiracy or whether it's something less dramatic like false statements, how many people is he going to be able to pardon before, as a political matter, the public and members of Congress say it's enough?
Carrie, while we have you here, Counselor, I want to go back to Jay Sekulow, who over the weekend now out loud says that he misspoke 1 year ago when he said very publicly that President Trump did not dictate that response to the Trump Tower letter. Do lawyers get bad information the way that Jay Sekulow is suggesting they do? It seems to me that if your client is the president is accused of, in the public, of dictating a letter, you may ask him if he did so and have that information a year ago.
Well, you can't help it if your client lies to you. I mean, the president, he lies publicly. I don't know why there's any reason to think that he doesn't lie privately as well. So if the lawyer is misled by the client, there's not any reason to think that the lawyer in this case made statements that he understood to be untrue, but it puts the lawyer in a difficult position if the client lies to them. And then the lawyer has to go out and that's part of the difficulty in accepting a relationship with a client like this, because as a lawyer, you put your own reputation on the line.
So is Jay Sekulow basically saying out loud for all of us to see that the president lied to me here?
Well, he's certainly suggesting that he was misled.
By someone.
By someone. Yeah.
And he got bad information. All right, Carrie, Alex, John, thank you very much.
All right, the death toll is rising in Indonesia from the earthquake there. We have new details coming just in. Stay with us. News out of Indonesia. The death toll is rising at least 91. After the 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck the island of Lombok. That happened over the weekend. Indonesia's National Disaster Management Agency says at least 209 people are injured. 132 aftershocks have been felt since the initial quake. More than 350 tourists have been evacuated from Lombok and the surrounding islands. Hundreds more still waiting to be rescued. At least 3,000 homes have been destroyed. Officials say at least 20,000 residents have been displaced.
11 children found starving in an underground trailer in a heavily armed compound in New Mexico. The local sheriff says they looked like third world country refugees with no food or fresh water, no shoes, no personal hygiene. Authorities executed a search warrant on Friday and found the 11 emaciated children aged 1 through 15 years old, along with 3 women believed to be their mothers. 2 heavily armed men were arrested at the scene. 5 adults faced child abuse charges.
Hollywood, in fact, the whole country is mourning the loss of actress Charlotte.
5 adults faced child abuse charges.
Hollywood, in fact, the whole country is mourning the loss of actress Charlotte Rae, best known for playing the wise and lovable housekeeper Mrs. Garrett. First on Different Strokes, and then she was so good at it, Alisyn.
Yes.
So good, they spun it off into its own series.
No way.
The Facts of Life.
Alex! Who's the best mother in the world? I am! How come? I got the best son! Mama! Oh, why didn't you tell me you were coming?
Unclear who that actor was since The Facts of Life.
Why didn't he go on to greatness is what I'm wondering.
Tootie over there in the corner there did not play a major role in that scene. Charlotte Rae's son tells CNN she died Sunday at the age of 92 at her home in Los Angeles. A cause of death has not been released. Rae's career took off, obviously, after landing that same role, Mrs. Garrett, on Different Strokes. And then as we just saw her, The Facts of Life, she went on to star in several other TV shows and movies. But for those of us who grew up on reruns and the like, there she is as Mrs. Rae. That's how she will be remembered. It really was quite a nice role.
Yeah, she had a wonderful career. And by the way, the picture of her later, years later,
great.
She looks fantastic. I mean, that's a beautiful picture. We'll put it up at some point of her completely white-haired, smiling and looking great. There she is. Look at that. I mean, that pops through the screen. All right. Meanwhile, the First Lady has, as you know, been showing an independent streak. She sometimes contradicts things that her husband says publicly. Well, she's doing it again about LeBron James. We'll dive into that next. First Lady Melania Trump is contradicting her husband publicly once again. On Friday, NBA star LeBron James was interviewed by CNN's Don Lemon about a school that LeBron founded in Ohio. That interview prompted the president to insult LeBron James's intelligence. Well, the First Lady's spokeswoman then issued this statement in response, which reads, in part, "It looks like LeBron James is working to do good things on behalf of our next generation. She, the First Lady, would be open to visiting the I Promise school in Akron." Joining us now is CNN White House reporter Kate Bennett, who covers the East Wing and got that statement. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning.
Can you explain what we're seeing here? Explain why the First Lady felt the need to weigh into this imbroglio.
Well, I think it's interesting that she felt the need to weigh into this one in particular. I think, so many people were hashtagging their tweets back at the president Be Best, which is, of course, the First Lady's initiative and platform about practicing kindness and helping children. So in a way, inevitably, I think the question was going to come to her either way. I mean, I certainly asked it, how does the First Lady feel about people using Be Best in this manner? She's been expressing this independent streak, I believe, for quite some time. I cover her extensively for CNN. This is a First Lady who clearly has her own thoughts and feelings, and sometimes those are incredibly juxtaposed or in contrast to those of her husband. She took a lot of flack for supporting stopping cyberbullying, for instance, as part of her Be Best platform. There's practicing social media kindness, certainly not something that her husband does. She took it on anyway. This LeBron James incident, I believe, is another example of her, just wanting to talk about how she feels. It's clearly different from her husband, and I think that that's, quite frankly, okay.
It is okay, but it is also curious, just historically, when a First Lady publicly breaks with the president, and she's done it more than once. We've compiled just in our recent memory some of the things that she has publicly spoken out. So she went to the State of the Union in a separate car from her husband. Is she allowed to do that? Sure. Is it unusual? Yes, it is. Her Be Best campaign, as you say, promotes positivity and kindness on social media, something that her husband does not follow. And of course, that raises questions as to what impact her campaign is having if she can't get her husband to get on board with that. And we liked the "she watches any channel she wants" statement, because that was after the president discovered her channel tuned to CNN. She clearly has refined taste. She rebuked the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, in public after Giuliani said something to the effect of that the president had apologized or something to Melania about, I guess, Stormy Daniels. I'm forgetting that one, but in any event, yeah. So she said that she had not spoken to Giuliani, and she speaks for herself. And when Ivana Trump came out and talked about that she was the real First Lady, obviously, then the true First Lady, Melania Trump, decided to weigh in on that. And so how does she choose, do you think, Kate, what she wants to get ensnared in and what she doesn't?
So the pattern I've noticed in terms of these sort of clapbacks, as I call them, like the Rudy Giuliani one, where her spokeswoman said, I don't think she's ever had a conversation with Giuliani, much less about her marriage or her husband's alleged infidelity. Those are when she feels people are speaking for her, putting words in her mouth, saying something. When Ivana said, I don't want Melania to be jealous if I call the White House and speak to my ex-husband, clearly Melania was saying, I'm not going to be jealous. I'm not here to sell books. You are. It was sort of a spicy comeback, if you will. The other stuff, taking on bullying, people often say if she can't get her husband to do it, well, how can she take it on? Well, one, I sort of think that who can get her husband to do anything, right? And she said publicly before, I tell him about the tweets. I tell him, of course I do. He doesn't listen. He's an adult. He knows the consequences. So certainly she does try to do these sorts of pushbacks and things, but she does them anyway. And I think that that's what we're missing about this First Lady sometimes, is that in spite of, listen, remember she had her kidney medical procedure and everyone said, where's Melania? Where's Melania? And she just said she didn't feel the need to come out and sort of smile before the cameras and show everyone she was okay. She said, I'll come out when I quite frankly feel like coming out. It's just a very different vibe. This East Wing operates almost completely separately from the West Wing. There's not a lot of back and forth. There's not a lot of cooperation. And on both sides, neither seem to mind necessarily, but there's not a lot of communication between the two sides. And therefore, Melania Trump is pretty free to do what she wants, and she does. And of course, I'll add the State of the Union separate motorcade was very unusual. I remember when I got that tip, Alisyn, that she was going separately, I went to the live desk and said, she's taking a different car. And the response was, no, they always go together. I said, no, you're not hearing me. She's taking a different car. That's how unusual it was. And of course, that was in the midst of all the Stormy Daniels headlines back in January.
All of this is unusual, but we really appreciate, Kate, you giving us the inside perspective on how it operates there. Thank you very much for the reporting. John.
I think Kate's got a better read on this than any reporter in America. She watches it very, very carefully and notes when things are different.
Agreed.
And they just are.
There's no way around that. Yes.
All right, so could another summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un be in the works? The answer is perhaps. We have a live report next. At midnight tonight, the United States will reimpose sanctions on Iran months after President Trump announced he was unilaterally pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. The sanctions will target Iran's auto industry, steel and aluminum manufacturing, and other metals, including gold. At least a dozen global companies have pulled out of the country in anticipation of the sanctions. State media says Iran's president will respond soon. He is set to appear before his parliament to talk about the country's economic woes, and he is expected to address President Trump directly.
So North Korea is expressing interest in another face-to-face meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. A source familiar with North Korea's position says there is a, quote, strong possibility of a second summit sometime this year. CNN's Will Ripley is live in Hong Kong with the latest. What do you know about this possibility, Will?
Well, if you look at what's been happening over the last week or so, this source is saying that things have been quite positive when you're talking about relations between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Not necessarily the U.S. and North Korea, which have been kind of ramping up the tension as of late, with Secretary of State Pompeo over the weekend blasting Russia, saying they aren't enforcing UN Security Council resolutions, calling on all nations to continue enforcing sanctions against Pyongyang, accusing North Korea of stepping up its nuclear program, not denuclearizing, as was pledged at the Singapore summit. And yet President Trump and Kim Jong-un have been exchanging letters. President Trump tweeted last week, "Thank you for the very nice letter, Chairman Kim. I look forward to seeing you soon." And now this source is saying there's a very strong possibility on the North Korean side that there could be a second Trump and Kim summit at some point later this year. The North Koreans say they believe it's going to happen. They think that the only negotiations that are going to have any results are going to be directly between Trump and Kim. And if you listen to all the North Korean messaging, even as they blast the U.S., they have been consistent in their praise of President Trump, saying that the United States' internal politics are getting in the way, but that President Trump's intention is for North Korea and the U.S. to make a deal. Now, this source also saying the North Koreans' criticism of the U.S. could be a negotiating tactic to put pressure on the Trump administration, and they're hoping that before the midterms, if Trump and Kim sit down, they can get a deal favorable to them, and Trump can walk away claiming he has a more substantive denuclearization plan. John?
And of course, Will, the president thinks this meeting has helped them politically, so it would not be surprising if he tried to get another one before the midterm elections. Will Ripley for us in Hong Kong. Great reporting as always. We'll appreciate it. So there's this new documentary getting a lot of buzz about the decades-long connections between President Trump and Russia. What new is in here? Stay with us.
I like chillaxin'. The new United Explorer card makes things easy. Traveling lighter. Taking a shortcut. Woo! Taking a breather. Rewarded.
Learn more at the Explorer.